In the heart of New England, nestled between vast whispering forests and a winding river, sat the quaint town of Brooksville. The town, seemingly untouched by time, had long been the perfect image of small-town America. The Thompson family was, by all accounts, the backbone of Brooksville's social fabric. David Thompson, a respected lawyer, was a man of principle, known for his unwavering dedication to justice. His wife, Claire, was the perfect hostess, graceful, kind, and always impeccably dressed. Together with their two children, Emma, 21, and Mason, 17, they lived in a grand colonial house on the town's edge, its white columns standing tall like sentinels guarding the perfect life within. Neighbors admired them. David and Claire seemed inseparable, and their children were bright, charming, and polite. They appeared, on the outside, as the epitome of suburban bliss. But beneath the polished veneer of perfection, cracks had begun to form. And like all imperfections hidden for too long, these cracks would soon tear the Thompsons apart in ways no one in Brooksville could ever imagine. It was a humid summer morning when Emma came home from college. The town felt the same to her, but there was something in the air, a tension she couldn't quite place. The familiar sounds and smells, crickets chirping in the distance, the gentle hum of the river, felt comforting, but the unease in her chest lingered. She was looking forward to a few months of relaxation before her final year of school, eager to reconnect with her family. Emma's return had always been a cause for celebration, but this time felt different. There was no joyous welcome, no family barbecue. Her mother was distant, her father distracted. Claire had always been the foundation of the household. She had been the kind of mother who attended every school play, packed elaborate lunches, and never missed a church function. As a child, Emma had always admired her mother for her grace and warmth. Claire had been the perfect balance of maternal care and social charm, but in recent years something had shifted. The vibrancy that once defined her mother had dulled. It was subtle at first, the occasional forced smile, the way she'd stare off into the distance when she thought no one was watching. But now, it was impossible to ignore. Claire, once full of life and laughter, had grown quiet, almost withdrawn. David's law career, while successful, had slowly become his obsession, leaving Claire alone in their grand house. As the children grew older and more independent, Claire's life became filled with lonely afternoons and nights spent waiting for a husband who was more interested in his legal cases than in her. Emma had witnessed her father's increasing absences, the missed dinners, the late-night phone calls from clients. But she had never imagined that her mother's loneliness might lead her down a path of betrayal. It was during one of these lonely nights that Michael entered her life in a different way. Michael had been a family friend for as long as Claire could remember. He and David had been best friends since childhood, and Michael, never married, had always been around. He was practically a part of the family, a constant presence at dinners, holidays, and even vacations. But one evening, after one too many glasses of wine, something shifted between them. At first it was subtle. A lingering glance, a hand that stayed just a moment too long on her shoulder. Claire, feeling isolated and craving connection, began to notice Michael more and more. They started talking late into the night when David wasn't home, sharing their frustrations, their dreams, and their disappointments. Michael became the confidant Claire had been craving for years, and soon the boundary between friendship and something more was crossed. For Claire, the affair was intoxicating at first. It was a chance to feel alive again, to reclaim a piece of herself that she had long thought lost. Michael was attentive, affectionate, and most importantly, present. Their meetings were stolen moments, illicit, thrilling. But as the thrill of the affair faded, guilt crept in. Every time Claire looked at David, she felt a deep pang of regret. She had built her life around him, around their family, and now she was tearing it apart. Still, she couldn't stop. The affair had become her lifeline, a dangerous one, but a lifeline nonetheless. Emma had no idea what she was about to uncover. One afternoon, while looking for her mother's keys, she stumbled upon Claire's phone on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a notification. A message from Michael. At first, Emma thought nothing of it. Michael was like family after all. But curiosity got the better of her, and she unlocked the phone. What she found made her heart race. There, in plain view, were dozens of messages. Intimate, personal, damning. Emma's hands trembled as she scrolled through the texts. The messages told a story she couldn't believe. Her mother and Michael had been having an affair for months. It wasn't just a fling. It was something deeper, something that had been festering beneath the surface for far too long. The words on the screen blurred as tears welled in Emma's eyes. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. How could this be happening? How could her mother, the woman she had looked up to her entire life, do something like this? And with Michael, of all people, her father's best friend? Emma, a psychology major, had studied the effects of infidelity on families, but nothing had prepared her for the raw, personal betrayal she felt now. The discovery was like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. She felt torn between anger and sadness, confusion and disbelief. She didn't know what to do. Should she confront her mother? Should she tell her father? Every option felt like it would shatter their family beyond repair. For days, Emma carried the weight of the secret, avoiding her mother and withdrawing from the family. The guilt gnawed at her, but she was too afraid of the consequences of telling the truth. The atmosphere in the house had grown tense, and Claire, sensing her daughter's distance, had tried to reach out. But Emma pushed her away, unable to look her mother in the eye. When she finally worked up the courage to confront her mother, the house was quiet. Mason was out with friends, and her father was still at work. Claire was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board filled the silence. Emma stood in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mom," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to ask you something." Claire looked up, her face calm but tired. "What is it, sweetie?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Emma hesitated. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 1,000 times, but now that she was standing there, the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight, her palms sweaty. Instead, she blurted out, "Are you having an affair?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud, suffocating the room. Claire froze, the knife slipping from her hand and clattering onto the counter. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. Claire's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I saw the messages," Emma continued, her voice shaking with emotion. "You and Michael." Claire's body sagged, as if the weight of the secret had finally crushed her. She sat down at the kitchen table, her hands trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at her daughter. "Emma, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did." Emma felt sick to her stomach. This wasn't the mother she knew. The woman sitting in front of her, broken and ashamed, was a stranger. How could she have let this happen? How could she have betrayed not just her father, but the entire family? Without another word, Emma turned and fled the kitchen, slamming the front door behind her as she ran into the cool evening air. Emma didn't tell her father right away. The burden of the secret was too much to bear, but she couldn't bring herself to be the one to destroy their family. For days, she avoided the house as much as she could, spending nights at friends' houses and trying to escape the growing tension between her parents. But the guilt gnawed at her, eating away at her every time she saw her father. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be lied to be betrayed by the two people he trusted most in the world. Late one night, unable to sleep, Emma found herself standing outside her father's office door. Her heart pounded in her chest as she raised her hand to knock. She hesitated, her fingers hovering inches from the door. Should she tell him? Should she keep the secret? Every option felt like it would tear their family apart. Finally, she knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet house. David's voice called out from inside, "Come in." Emma opened the door and stepped into the dimly lit room. David was sitting at his desk, papers spread out in front of him. He looked up, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, sensing the tension in his daughter's posture. Emma took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you." David put down his pen, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it, Emma?" The words stuck in her throat, but she forced them out. "It's about Mom," she began, her voice trembling. She's been seeing someone else. Michael." For a moment, David didn't react. He simply stared at his daughter, as if the words hadn't fully registered. Then, slowly, his face drained of color. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I saw the messages," Emma continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "They've been having an affair for months." David stood up, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Claire, the woman he had loved for over 2 decades, the mother of his children, had been unfaithful. And with Michael, his oldest friend, someone he had trusted like a brother. The betrayal cut deep, a wound that would never fully heal. Without saying a word, David walked past Emma and out of the room. Emma watched him go, her heart heavy with guilt. She hadn't wanted to be the one to break his heart, but the truth had been too much to bear. The confrontation between David and Claire that followed was not the explosive fight one might expect. It was quiet, cold, and devastating. Claire wept, begging for forgiveness, but David could barely look at her. His silence spoke volumes, the weight of the betrayal hanging between them like a thick fog. In the days that followed, the tension in the house was unbearable. Claire stayed out of David's way, her guilt consuming her. She spent most of her time in the bedroom, crying, while David retreated to his office, burying himself in work. Emma and Mason, both deeply affected by the turmoil in the house, withdrew from their parents. Emma, now burdened with the knowledge of the affair, could hardly look at her mother. Mason, unaware of the full extent of the situation, sensed that something was terribly wrong, but didn't know how to help. But the real explosion came when David confronted Michael. For days, he had avoided it, trying to wrap his mind around the betrayal. But eventually, the anger simmering inside him demanded release. Michael, unaware that David knew, arrived at the Thompson house one evening, hoping to smooth things over with Claire. He knocked on the door, expecting the usual polite greeting from his old friend. But when David answered the door, his face dark with rage, Michael knew immediately that something was wrong. "I know," David said, his voice cold and steely. Michael froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "David, he began, but David cut him off. "Don't," David said, stepping closer. "Don't you dare try to explain." For a moment, the two men stood in silence, the tension between them palpable. Then, Without warning, David lunged at Michael, pushing him back into the house. Michael stumbled, crashing into the hallway table, but David didn't stop. Years of pent-up anger and betrayal fueled his every move. He grabbed Michael by the collar, his fists connecting with Michael's face over and over until blood stained the carpet. Claire, hearing the commotion, rushed down the stairs, screaming for David to stop. But he didn't. Not until Michael lay on the floor, unconscious and bleeding, did David finally back away, his chest heaving with exertion. The police were called, and David was arrested that night. The media descended on Brooksville, eager to uncover the details of the scandal that had rocked the small town to its core. The Thompson family, once admired and respected, had become the subject of gossip and whispers. The trial was swift, and David, now a broken man, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for aggravated assault. Claire, unable to bear the shame and guilt, left Brooksville shortly after the trial, moving to a small town far away where no one knew her name. Emma and Mason, now both deeply scarred by the events that had unfolded, struggled to rebuild their lives. Brooksville, once a town defined by its sense of community, was now a place haunted by the memory of what had happened in the Thompson home. The town had lost its innocence, and the Thompson family had lost everything. Years later, Emma would return to Brooksville, hoping to find some closure. She stood at the edge of town, looking at the house where she had grown up, now overgrown and abandoned. The memories flooded back. Memories of a time before the lies, before the betrayal, before everything had fallen apart. She had hoped that coming back would bring her peace, but as she turned to leave, she realized that some wounds, no matter how much time passes, never fully heal.